Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 13th of August of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start from the Black Sea. According to the Russian sources, they managed to discover another global hawk that was flying above the territory, above the surface of the Black Sea. And the global hawk was flying on the central, on the southern and the western part of that sea. And basically, as I understand, we can expect more strikes, another wave of a drone attack or missiles attacks against Crimea, and to be more precise, against the Crimean Bridge. Furthermore, the Russian local authorities at 4 p.m. of the local time closed the passage, closed the bridge for the civilian cars and civilian vehicles and so on. So basically this area is closed. And as I understand, the Russians start using new tactics as the same as the United States of America. We need to understand a few things. If anybody, anywhere, anytime wants to attack Crimean Bridge, they need to attack very small bridge. Of course, very small bridge, and it is very difficult. It is very difficult to attack accurately and to get on the surface, on the road, on the roadway, and so on. And to do this, of course, the best solution for the Western countries and for the United States of America is to have something on bridge that will send a signal. For example, if there is something on the bridge that can send anywhere a signal that can be retranslated to the Ukrainian intelligence or to the other services, then it's the best configuration to attack the bridge. So as I understand, the Russians managed to discover the Western tactics, and every time the global hawk appears above the surface of the Black Sea, the Russians close the bridge because probably there is a car or there is a tactic to send the car on the bridge that can send a signal to the global hawk, and this signal will be retranslated further to probably to the territory of Odessa, or let's say to the Ukrainian services. And this signal, these coordinates can be used for the Ukrainians, for the Storm Shadow missiles, for S-200 missiles that upgraded to land attacks. And this is the situation. So basically we see the new tactics and some adoptions from both sides, either from the Russians and the United States, how to prevent difficult and very interesting situation, very dangerous situation in the Crimean area. Furthermore, today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation published very interesting information that at 6 a.m. of the local time, the Russians discovered a small ship by the name of Sukra Okan under the flag of Palau that was heading in direction of Izmail, the Ukrainian port. The Russians started their action, they started acting and required this ship to stop and to get prepared before the inspections. But the ship didn't reply to the Russian signals and increased the speed and continued their movement in direction of Izmail, the port that located on the river Dunabi. The Russians sent the helicopter Ka-29, and after, let's say, friendly fire, or let's say like after the warning fire, that ship stopped and the Russians completed their inspection. As a result of that inspection, the Russians haven't managed to find anything, but anyway, we understand that both sides, the Russians and the United States of America, also were trying to test each other and to find the red line. Of course, we expected this situation from the United States of America, from the NATO countries. Of course, the Russians reported that they will inspect every single ship and not allow anybody to enter South Odessa area and so on, and will not allow anybody to send weapon to Ukraine, and that was the Russian red line. And the Western countries, of course, wanted to test the Russian reaction on this situation, and we see the Russian reaction. From one side, we see that the Russians shown their balls and that they can do, and that they're a man of word, and if they told us, they would complete and they would follow everything, every single word they told us. But from the other side, we see that this is also a weak position from the Russians, because the next time when the Western countries will send the ship and the Russians will take a decision to inspect the ship, the Ukrainians can make an ambush for the Russian ship and to attack the ship with the Navy drones. So very difficult and complicated situation, and the Russians need to be ready for everything. Now we're moving further to the Kherson area. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 20 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system, Howitzer M777. The Ukrainians still control and have a small bridgehead on the Russian side of Dnieper River. Basically, the Russians are not able to do anything with this. We can see the repeat of the same situation in the vicinity of Antonov Bridge, and the situation is as follows. The main Russian positions are located around this area, and basically the Ukrainian bridgehead on this bank of the river is blocked. The Ukrainians are blocked. They don't have possibilities to send tanks, to send armored vehicles. The only thing the Ukrainians can do is to send Marines and more troopers on this bridge of the river, on this bank of the river. And the only thing the Ukrainians can do is to create some trenches and to dig as deep as possible. And the Russians understand them and they control the entire situation. But from the other side, the Russians also can't counterattack and can't start the storming or clearing operation of this bank of the river, because the Ukrainians have established complete fire control over the Russian trenches, and as soon as if the Russians start movement, the Ukrainians start bombing and shelling the Russians from their bank of the river, because they see everything, because the Ukrainian bank of the river is located on the hill and the Russians is in the lowland. So what is the solution for this situation? The solution is very simple. The Russians, if they want to force the Ukrainians to step back, first of all need to suppress the Ukrainian artillery squads and artillery on the Ukrainian side of the river. It is a very difficult situation, a very difficult operation, because the main Lancet forces currently are located in Zaporizhzhia, on Orekhov bridgehead, let's say on the Kupiansk front line. And when talking about this area, we haven't received any evidence or any video or photo confirmation of usage Lancet during the previous week. That means that main Lancet forces, main drone forces were redeployed from this area to Zaporizhzhia. And currently, the Russians don't have technical possibility to suppress the Ukrainian artillery system. They can use just, let's say, Stab B howitzer, D20, D30 howitzer, just local regular artillery systems that, of course, are not able to suppress such artillery systems like M777 howitzer or, let's say, HIMARS systems, because of differences in range of usage of these systems. So Ukrainians can feel themselves pretty comfortable on this bridgehead. Of course, the Ukrainians are not able to develop the bridgehead, because from the other side, the Russians, of course, have some certain control over the river, and they can destroy every single ship that goes on the Ukrainian side. And another important thing, that Ukrainians can't send the boat from one side to another. The Ukrainians, if they want to land their troopers on this bridgehead in the vicinity of Kazachye Lagery, they need to start their movement probably somewhere maybe from Ivanovka. So they need to pass a very big distance, and of course the river is under Russian control. And so this is a both side controllable situation. From one side, the Russians can't force the Ukrainians to step back until at least they will get some technical equipment like Lancet to suppress Ukrainian artillery. And from the other side, the Ukrainians can't develop the bridgehead because of absence of armored vehicle and the lack of armored vehicle. And of course, there are a lot of Russian trenches, and it's a suicide operation anyway. So this is the situation about Kherson. Now we're moving further to Zaporizhzhia area. Today we got some updates from the vicinity of Kupiansk and Petykhatki that we have already discussed in the previous video, and we got a lot of updates from Orekhov bridgehead from the Bradley Square. During the day, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack the Russian positions, and the Russian sources published a lot of videos. For example, today at 10 a.m., the Ukrainians launched another attack using 4 tanks, 1 light vehicle, Hammer, and up to 60 personnel in their offensive operation. As a result of those attacks, the Russians opened artillery fire, and today we got some videos from this bridgehead how another Ukrainian tank was trying to move among the fields. The Russians destroyed that tank using anti-tank missile. And on another video, we see how the Ukrainians were heading in direction of the northern part of Robotyne using significant number of forces, infantry. The Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces along this forest line that goes from the Ukrainian positions on the north to the northern part of Robotyne, which from one side confirms that the Ukrainians have some bridgehead on the northern part, and that the Russians controls just the central and the southern part of Robotyne. One more thing about this operation of Ukrainians. This northern part of Robotyne is even worse than the developed bridgehead among the fields in Robotyne. The thing is that Ukrainians spent around 2 months to capture a small bridgehead inside of the settlement. That means that currently, of course, the Ukrainians are pretty tired of previous days of losses and so on, and this situation with the north of Robotyne is like a bonus to a dog that Ukrainians can have tasted this, the taste of blood, and now they want to send more and more forces to the settlement with one purpose: to develop the bridgehead and to penetrate the central defense belt in Robotyne and to force the Russians to step back completely from the settlement, to basically to repeat the situation in Urozhaine. And from one side, this, let's say, gives the Ukrainians some feeling of victory, but from another side, we understand that it will lead to increase of Ukrainian losses during this battle as well, because the Russians control the situation, and the both previous two videos we discussed shown us the results of Russian counter-artillery duels and artillery strikes against the Ukrainian offensive forces. So this is about Zaporizhzhia. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in the vicinity of Orekhov, the Ukrainians lost around 40 soldiers, 13 armored vehicles, including 5 tanks, and 4 artillery systems. So as you can see, the main losses were among armored vehicles, 13 including 5 tanks, and one of the tank destroyed we just saw on the video. Now we're moving probably to the most important area of the previous 24 hours. We are going to talk about Urozhaine. A lot of updates, a lot of rumors, a lot of speculations, a lot of different information about this territory, about this sector. So let's try to understand what exactly is happening in this area. Today we got at least 4 important videos from this area, and we will discuss every single one. But before starting discussion of this video, we need to return a little bit back to the situation that took place during the previous few days, and I'm talking about the usage of JDAM missiles or bombs against the central part of Urozhaine. We discussed this situation many times. I think we need to repeat this video one more time for better understanding. On this video we see the usage of JDAM, or analog of this bomb that can be attacked by the HIMARS systems. On this video we see how the Ukrainians attack the central and the northern part of the settlement, and to be more precise, exactly this building. And on another video we saw how the Russians were using this building in the central part of Urozhaine as a main base, probably as an ammo depot or place where the Russians had some like rotation process, some like positions where they can have some rest or something like this. And today, just after a day of everybody published that video, we got the first evidence, the first confirmation of a very critical situation of the Russians in this area. For example, the author of this video claims that the Russians were sending the second wave for evacuation purposes. On this video, we see how the Russian light vehicle was moving along the buildings, along almost ruined Urozhaine, not ruined as Marinka. There are still a lot of places where the Russians could have a battle, but on this video we see how the Russians entering or getting to this white building, and this is exactly the building that was bombed by the JDAM bombs recently during the previous days, and there were a lot of wounded soldiers, as I understand, and the Russians were trying to make some evacuation. On this video, and the Russian soldiers probably started entering this car, but you know that when watching this video I haven't seen the moment when the Russian infantry entered the car, but the author says about that there was some evacuation, maybe during this smoke screen, or maybe this video is made of few cuts or something like this, but the authors are saying that there was like real evacuation. And after that, these light vehicles start moving and heading to the south in direction of the settlement, in direction of the southern part of Urozhaine, and of course in direction of the next defense belt in this area, and we're talking about Zavitne-Bazhanye. So that was the video, the first video. Later we got another video how the Ukrainians were attacking Urozhaine from the northern part in direction of the central. We see the convoys of Ukrainian forces, convoys of Ukrainian light vehicles, probably Cossacks or maybe another type of light vehicles. They were heading almost without any barriers, almost without any like problems. This video was made by the Russian sources. as I understand, maybe by the Ukrainian sources, but anyway, the Ukrainians were heading to the south. And at some point, some moment, the Russians start bombing and shelling this area, and as a result of one of those attacks, one light vehicle or armored vehicle of Ukrainian forces was destroyed. But this situation didn't stop the Ukrainians. They continue movement, they continue attacking, and furthermore, a little bit in a moment, in a second, we're going to see that the Ukrainians managed to capture a few buildings in the central part. And according to information I have, according to this geolocation, I understand that Ukrainians captured this industrial area, and this 100% confirmed update regarding the area of control of Ukrainian forces. At least this industrial area was captured by, let's say, noon time of today of the local time. Few hours later, we got another video. So basically, according to that video, one more time, the Ukrainians were moving along this road to the south. At some point, somewhere in this area, one armored vehicle of Ukrainian forces was destroyed as a result, probably of anti-tank missile or artillery strike. Then the rest of Ukrainian light vehicles moved further to the south and captured this industrial area. So basically, the movement was from the north to the south, and the Ukrainians established their positions in this area. Later, a few hours later, we got another video from this geolocated position, how the Ukrainian tank, we can recognize the Ukrainian tank according to the white crosses on board, and this is Ukrainian-like behavior to add such a white cross on tanks. And from these positions, the tank was attacking. And as you can see, according to direction of attack, the Ukrainian tank was located in this area, and the Ukrainians were attacking in this direction, so in direction of the central part of Urozhaine. Probably there were still some Russian forces who were trying to protect the central part of that settlement. And during all these videos, we got a lot of updates from the Russian sources that the Russians haven't left the settlement, that the Russians are still inside of the settlement, that they're holding the central part and the southern part and so on. Yes, we got this video from the Ukrainian side, and probably that was the normal theory that the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours managed to develop their bridgehead to the south, the Russians accumulated their forces in the central part, and this is like the story and configuration for the next days of clashes for this settlement. But somewhere at 4 p.m. of the local time, we got another video from almost in the vicinity of Zaporizhzhia, and this video was made by the Ukrainian sources. On this video, we see how the Russian infantry was moving from Urozhaine. This video is geolocated to the south of Zaporizhzhia. You can find this video on my Telegram channel. We will not watch this video till the end, because in a moment the Ukrainians started bombing and shelling the Russian infantry. There were a few dozens of Ukrainian soldiers, probably up to 50 soldiers. The Ukrainians started bombing and shelling the Russians along this way with the cluster rounds. So it's very difficult. The quality of video is not so good, as you can see, was not so good. So basically, it's very difficult to calculate the number of Russian losses. But anyway, the Ukrainians were attacking them with the cluster rounds. And now let's return back to the question whether the Russians left Urozhaine or not. I'll give you my opinion. First of all, there were a lot of Russians in Urozhaine, a lot of Russian soldiers, to be more precise, Cascade forces of Cascade Special Forces, something like this. And as we see, during the previous days, the Ukrainians started using Western modern weapons like JDAM and probably HIMARS systems and many other types of weapons. At some certain point of time, the Russians realized that there are very high risk of being encircled by the Ukrainian forces or to be destroyed by the Russian forces. And probably the Russian commanders took a decision to withdraw their positions and to step back from this settlement. And now imagine yourself the situation when the Minister of Defense or the Russian Telegram channel started saying or confirming that the Russians took a decision to withdraw their positions. Of course, it's going to be something like another tasty piece of cake for the Ukrainians, and if the Ukrainians manage to find out the situation, to discover the situation, of course they will launch significant number of waves of attacks against the Russian withdrawing forces. So basically currently we see an episode of a very special operation when the Russians realized their positions, real situation in the settlement, and the Russians took a decision to save them, the manpower, to save experienced soldiers, to evacuate from the settlement. But for the rest of the world, the Russians took a decision to tell that we are keeping the settlement just with one purpose: to slow down the Ukrainians, to not to give them possibility to feel them safe, and just to slow them down and not to give them opportunity to attacking the Russians back. Of course, there are some forces in Urozhaine, but there are mainly rearguard forces. Nothing more, just rearguard forces, and as soon as the Russians complete the evacuation, these rearguard forces will leave Urozhaine as well, and the Ukrainians will complete this battle of this settlement. I expect that probably within the next 24 hours, the Russians will complete the evacuation and the Ukrainians will establish final control over the settlement. And one more time, based on this video, we see significant number of Russian infantry that were heading from Urozhaine to Zavitne-Bazhanye. A lot of troopers, so probably around 60% of the infantry was already evacuated from that settlement, and just the rearguard forces were making some kind of protections in that settlement, not to allow the Ukrainians to destroy and to encircle the Russians in this area. Furthermore, the Ukrainians continue bombing and attacking the Russian positions with drones. Today they published a lot of videos of drone strikes. The Ukrainians continue. On this video we see how the Ukrainians destroyed the radar. On this video we see how the Ukrainians discovered another truck that probably was moving to one of the settlements with ammunition or food, and that truck was attacked by the Ukrainian drone. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in the area between Vremivka tactical bridgehead and South Donetsk area and Ugledar and Marinka, the Ukrainians lost 80 soldiers, 8 armored vehicles, including 1 tank. So this is the situation of Urozhaine. So we expect the complete withdrawal of the Russians from this area. Also, the Russians published the video of another Lancet strike. On this video we see how the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian self-propelled howitzer 2S1, and as a result of Lancet strike, that howitzer was destroyed. So, but this is the only thing that we got positive from the Russians. Of course, the evacuation, probably they managed to save lives of soldiers and the destroy of artillery system. When talking about Donetsk area, Donetsk bridgehead, we have already discussed the situation in the morning about the Russian offensive operation in the north of Novomikhailivka and more drone strikes against Krasnogorovka. And during the second half of the day, we got another interesting update that the Russians managed to discover and to destroy the Ukrainian radar or anti-artillery system, anti-artillery radar behind Первомайsk on the north of Krasnogorovka that Ukrainians were using to discover the Russian artillery positions using some kind of intelligence drone the Russians discovered. And after artillery strike, the Ukrainians lost another radar in this area. And that attack, that episode was a part of the Battle of Nivolskaya. Of course, because we understand that Ukrainians used these fields between Karlovka, Nitailova, Pervomayska as the area to support the Ukrainian forces in Nivolsk and Krasnogorovka. So this is another episode of the battle, as I understand, of the settlement by the name of Krasnogorovka. Now we're moving probably to the second most interesting part of the front line, to Klishchiivka. Before we start with Klishchiivka, the Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in the vicinity of Marinka, Donetsk, Staromikhailivka, Avdiivka and Klishchiivka as well, the Ukrainians lost 300 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles. The Russians managed to repel 6 attacks, and as you can see, the level of losses is very heavy, at least in comparison with the previous day. Yesterday, the Russians reported about the losses of 110 soldiers, and today we see the level has been increased. And what was the reason of such changes? And as you know, the Russians start regrouping their forces in the vicinity of Klishchiivka. And this morning, in the previous video, we discussed that the Russian military authorities took a decision to redeploy additional forces in this area. To be more precise, the Russians took a decision to redeploy 2 motorized battalions and 1 artillery division. And we were guessing what was the purpose of this reinforcement, or to defend or to attack, and we got the answer to this question after somewhere at 4 or 5 p.m. and during the day, let's call it like this. First, we got the video from Andreevka. The Russian tank was moving to their positions to attack the Ukrainian positions along the channel. This video is geolocated. The Russian tank got along these forest lines on the west of Andreevka and started bombing and shelling in direction of Ukrainian positions that were located along the channel. So the Russian tank was attacking in this direction. So that was the first video of, let's say, another tank attack or support operation or something like this. After that, as soon as the Russians managed to secure the flank by these tanks, like to block this area, and basically it was not just a tank attack, it was a shield that the Russians were using to protect the Russian flanks in the vicinity of the southern bridgehead of Klishchiivka. Later we got the video how the Russians were started massive bombing and attacking of Ukrainian positions along the channel, along the canal. This video is also geolocated. As you can see, the Russians were using missiles of Grad weapon, and basically they managed to suppress probably some Ukrainian forces that probably were heading in some direction. And so let's add another arrow. And this is that attack was made by Grad system. And I'll remind you that according to piece of information we got in the morning, that the Russians have redeployed 2 tank battalions and let's call it 1 Grad division. And now we see, like in the afternoon, we see all these forces in action. And the most interesting and probably the most powerful video of the day is the Russian offensive operation in direction of the south of Klishchiivka. The Russians using the group of 2 tanks and probably 1 Terminator, because it's very difficult to recognize what kind of vehicles were involved in that operation, but I understand that there was 2 tanks and 1 Terminator, started their movements from the south, from Andreevka area among the fields, and started attacking heavily the Ukrainian positions in Klishchiivka. As you can see, almost every single building was under Russian attack. There were also artillery strikes, all types of strikes, weapon of the Russians have, they were using against this territory, and basically as a result of that heaviest attack, the Ukrainian position was suppressed, and those who managed to survive, of course, were forced to step back from this bridgehead. And we have updated the map showing that the southern part of Klishchiivka is under complete Russian control. So that was something like this. The Russians started moving along the forest, along the fields in this direction. And as a result of attack, the Russians cleared the southern part and forced the Ukrainians to step back, probably in direction of the forest that located on the west of the southern part of Klishchiivka. I believe that this territory is in the gray zone, but as I understand, after very fierce clashes and battles that took place in this area during the previous weeks, the Ukrainians lost a lot of blood, lots of soldiers, a lot of manpower, a lot of everything they have. And we also discussed that one of the most powerful battalions, 24th Separate Assault Battalion Aidar of 5th Assault Brigade, was completely destroyed during those attacks, and the Ukrainians were forced to move this battalion in direction of the mainland for regrouping and so on. Furthermore, we got updates that the forces of Lut Assault Battalion also were destroyed and reduced almost till 0 during those attacks. And the Russians also, an important update, that the Russians have redeployed their forces of tanks and artillery that we discussed from Liman front line. Not from somewhere, I don't know where, but from Liman front line, very close to this area. And now we see that after such a successful offensive operation on the southern flank of Bakhmut, as I understand, the Russians will continue advancing and will continue making attempts to force the Ukrainians to step back from this side of the canal, and they will force, within the next few days, to force the Ukrainians to step back from this area and to go exactly, probably even to Chasov Yar. So the next days, the Russians will try to regain their lost positions during the battle of July. So this is the situation about Klishchiivka. One more time, as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians have lost around 300 soldiers, significant number of losses, and probably the Ukrainians have already started withdraw their positions. So we can say that the Russians have changed Klishchiivka for Urozhaine. But anyway, the battle of Urozhaine hasn't ended yet. We need more days. We need like the photo of Ukrainians in the town hall with the flag. Until this photo, we can't say that this settlement is under Ukrainian control, but I expect this photo to come this night of the local time. When talking about the northern flank, there were no updates. During the previous days, the Ukrainians also had a lot of forces in this area, and currently they're continuing the regrouping, and I'm not even sure that they will try to restart or repel that attack. So this day is a tank day. We see a lot of usage of the tanks in Urozhaine, in Zaporizhzhia, in the Bradley Square, in Klishchiivka. So a lot of tanks were destroyed, very powerful tank battles during the day. When talking about Siversk front line, there are no changes. The Russians moved some artillery forces to the combat line and continue doing their regular job by attacking and reducing the Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Sporne, in the vicinity of Bilogorovka, in the vicinity of the forest. This forest, for example, is under control of 54th Mechanized Brigade. The Russians reported they discovered another position of Ukrainian forces, and after artillery strike, 7 Ukrainian soldiers were wounded or probably killed. On this video, we see how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions along the Bilogorovka settlement. We see how the Russians discovered another checkpoint or stronghold of the Ukrainians, or machine gun positions or tank position, and as a result of artillery strike, that position was destroyed. But one more time, without any changes on the ground, the Russians are not making any attempts to attack in this direction. And starting off today, we start receiving some updates from Tarskoye salient. We were expecting more actions, more intensifying in this area, but just today we got probably the first geolocated video how the Russians currently are bombing and shelling Tarskoye, the settlement. There are a lot of on this video we can see a lot of episodes, but most of them took place exactly from Tarskoye, let's say, to Dubrovo and forest along the roads. The Russians were bombing during the previous months of Ukrainian control over this settlement, over this sector. The Ukrainians managed to create a very powerful network of strongholds, which of course reduced the Russian speed, and now the Russians are almost on the edge positions. And before continue their offensive operation, first they need to destroy all those strongholds, and of course it will take time. It will take a lot of time. So basically the same situation as we see in Krasnogorovka, in Novomikhailivka. The Russians, we can say, need to start everything from the beginning. First, to reduce their strongholds, and only after that we can expect some storm process of this defense belt on this side of Zherebets River. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 45 soldiers and 7 armored vehicles. When talking about Kupiansk, we haven't received almost nothing from this area as well, just the regular reports from the Ministry of Defense about improving the Russian positions, about capturing another checkpoints and something like this, another stronghold in the field. But without anything specified regarding the fields and regarding the strongholds and so on, just like common phrases like managed to improve their positions. The only probably interesting geolocation we got from the vicinity of Sinkovka, from this area. On this video we see how the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian armored vehicle exactly among these forest lines, and as a result of mortar strike that armored vehicle was damaged and probably destroyed, which confirms approximately some defense belt and defense positions of the Ukrainians in this area. Furthermore, the Russians published few interesting videos about attacking against the Ukrainian artillery positions along the railways that goes from Kupiansk to Kislevka-Kotlarovka. Just another ammo depot that was discovered by the Russians and destroyed as a result of artillery strike, and another artillery destroy of Ukrainian forces in the vicinity of Senkova, Berestova, and so on. So as you can see, the situation has been a little bit stabilized in Kupiansk front line. Maybe the Ukrainians managed to redeploy enough of reinforcement in this area, which of course from one perspective is good for the Ukrainians because they managed to stabilize the front line. But from another side, we see that the Russians used that situation and managed to penetrate the Ukrainians' defense belt in the vicinity of Klishchiivka and to force the Ukrainians to step back. Basically, the Ukrainians lost significant number of forces and haven't managed to capture even a single settlement in this area. And we see some progress of the Ukrainians in Urozhaine. That's it about the situation on the ground. Another interesting update we got from Kiev. The Russians reported, to be more precise, the Turkish sources reported that during the previous days there was a strike in direction of Kiev in the vicinity. The Ukrainians have redeployed another Patriot system in the vicinity of Juliana airport, and as a result of that strike, the Ukrainians lost another Patriot, and this according to the Turkish sources. So it's very difficult to understand, to to realize, to analyze the situation, because we haven't received any confirmation from the Ministry of Defense. Because if the Russians were able to shut down Patriot system, of course they would include this information into the reports, but we haven't received anything from the Russians regarding that attack in Kiev with Kinjal. So maybe it is some kind of speculation from the Turkish sources. And probably that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.